It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. Absolutely love being a broadcaster now. Doubleheader weekend for me this weekend. Thursday night in the radio booth, national radio, Westwood 1, for the Chargers and the Broncos, a huge game in which a lot of people will be rooting for the Broncos. Like if you live in Indianapolis or Cincinnati or I guess Miami or anywhere where you think you still have a chance at the playoffs, you want the Broncos to beat the Chargers. Then I'll take the red eye to Indianapolis because I got the CBS call of the Titans who are making a quarterback change and the Colts on Sunday. It is the fantasy semifinals. It's also big weekends for DFS because a lot of people are out of their fantasy playoffs, but they still like fantasy football. So, of course, do that at DraftKings. We're big fans there. And I've got the guy to make sure that not only are you ready for semifinal playoffs or DFS, but also just to be more knowledgeable about the sport. I tell everybody all the time on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, and we're dropping this feed on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, you will just learn a lot about these teams and these players just by listening to my guy, John Daigle, every week. He's at Not J Daigle on social media. He's one of the owners, along with guys like Adam Levitan, Evan Silva, over at EstablishTheRun.com. Use the code FEAST if you go over there for 5% off. Just a veritable smorgasbord of information. It's fantastic. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod, and we have no time to waste. We're starting, John, with my radio game. Broncos, Chargers, Thursday night.
Hoping for points here, but being a divisional contest where both of these teams have already played each other in a low-scoring affair, I'm a tad worried. Also, remember, these two teams are combined for giving up the NFL's fewest points per game. Bo Nix, at least for fantasy, we saw his rushing juice return, 8 carries for 23 yards this past week, despite being turnover-riddled, 3 interceptions against the Colts and Gus Bradley's zone coverage. But considering that in 5 of 6 games prior to that, he didn't even reach 5 rushing yards, I'm hoping Bo Nix can provide superflex value by continuing to show he can extend plays with his legs and tack on those rushing points. For Justin Herbert and the Chargers, it's been a little different because Herbert's going through what now? His 3rd, 4th injury, and it shows. 0 carries this past game for the Chargers as well, a non-factor in scrambling. And now on a short week against this Broncos menacing defense, I am a little bit worried, especially since Denver has allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Who I'm not worried about, even though I question Herbert's ceiling, is 1, Ladd McConkey. 1, because Ladd McConkey's running 67% of his routes from the slot, and we know Pat Surtain, he's only traveled to the slot on 6% of his coverage snaps. He doesn't go there. And so it's not just the fact that McConkey dominates zone coverage, and the Broncos man coverage, and the Broncos, in having all-world corners, play a lot of man coverage, the 5th highest rate in the league. I bet McConkey will have no issues earning targets here, but it's just the fact that also that in avoiding Pat Surtain, that we know he'll have an easier time than someone like Quentin Johnston, who did lead the team with 10 targets last week, popped over 45 receiving yards, his 8th touchdown of the season, which is incredible, as many as Justin Jefferson has as well. But McConkey's still the one I have the most faith in. And then for fantasy, it's the playoffs, the 2nd round. Everyone's looking for players to stream over guys like Kyle Pitts, Cade Otton, Cole Kmet, who have failed us in recent weeks just because of their changes in their offenses. And I think Stone Smart is someone who can continue answering that call. Only Chigo Okonkwo and David Njoku have been targeted at a higher rate of their routes than Stone Smart the past 2 games in place of Will Dissly, who opened the week with back-to-back DNPs. So definitely love streaming Smart in the 2nd round of the fantasy playoffs.
Wow. I love nuggets like that. That's a guy, a lot of people listening don't even know who that is. Stone Smart, and you're saying he's a good tight end streamer this week. Love
He looks
that,
like
John.
he looks like Ladarius Green out there. He's had a couple deep receptions.
Yes, he does. Looking forward to watching him. What about the Texans and the Chiefs, where Mahomes fully practiced? I couldn't believe that yesterday.
And it was so odd that it made me question if it's gamesmanship. Like, I wonder if Andy Reid's trying to throw D'Amico Ryans off. But if Mahomes is going to practice in full through his ankle injury, Hollywood Brown also got overshadowed because he also practiced in full with Mahomes. It's a wait-and-see game to see who's out there for Kansas City, who clearly still needs to play to win because they're battling the Bills for that important first-round bye in the AFC. If it's Carson Wentz, I'm a little more worried against this Texans defense that still puts quarterbacks under pressure at the second highest rate. Also 45 sacks, the second most in the league. Mahomes, we'll see if he's still as elusive through that ankle injury. It makes me a little bit concerned that this one also could lead us into a lower scoring game, especially since this Texans offense has continued to struggle mightily. It's almost like they've lost their identity and they're trying to establish it through Joe Mixon, but you can't really do that against the Chiefs. Not just stout in terms of what they allow to running backs on the ground, but also the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs in the entire league. The Chiefs have allowed. So Joe Mixon, yes, as an every touch player, you're starting him in the playoffs, but I am thinking it's closer to an RB2 or RB3 outlook. Who I'm not worried about is Nico Collins, because now, if you go back to last year, over his last 17 regular season games, 100 catches for 1,500 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. Those are Triple Crown numbers. Despite the fact that CJ Stroud is closer to a QB2 and this offense continues to struggle everywhere else they look to, Nico Collins has no issues creating separation and still providing wide receiver 1 numbers for fantasy. So, although, yes, we talked about some concerns here, perhaps a lower scoring game, Nico Collins, and then the sneakier play for the Chiefs, I would love to tell you it could be one of their running backs. The fact is Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt both split touches with 14 apiece last week, became more of a timeshare in Pacheco's second game back from injury, or third, I'm sorry. And so who I think they could continue to get involved more is explosive rookie Xavier Worthy, because he now is fresh off his second highest target share of the season, 29%, with 3 carries last week as well. And the fact that DeAndre Hopkins continues to be a rotational player, maybe they're just warming up for the playoffs, but the fact is he's gone over 60 receiving yards just once, and every game with the Chiefs. So I think Xavier Worthy is someone they are continuing to try to feature in this one, regardless of if it's a lower scoring, battle it out type of style of play.
Good stuff on Nico Collins. And, you know, you're right. I thought it was a little bit weird about Mahomes fully participating in practice. That just doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean? Like, even if he's going to play in the game, you'd think he would have been a limited participant because of the ankle. That's a great point.
And due to the schedule, remember, the Chiefs also play on Wednesday on Christmas. So this is their second game in 11 days of a 3-game stretch. And so, I wonder. I'm still skeptical. I will believe Mahomes is playing when I see him out there.
Wow. Good stuff. What about the Steelers and the Ravens? That's the other game on Saturday.
And the Ravens are the only defense so far that have held Russell Wilson without a passing touchdown. Unfortunately, what I think this game boils down to is George Pickens' availability. Pickens is a very, very good receiver. Did we think he actually craters the offense when he's not out there? Probably not initially. But now these past 2 games we've seen with Pickens off the field, they've averaged just 6.2 yards per attempt through the air. And when Pickens has played, 8.1. It's been entirely different. And probably because I think ancillary players like Calvin Austin, a very explosive option, Mike Williams, they are good options, but they are good wide receiver 2s and 3s. They still need the guy out there who can battle downfield for contested catches and man coverage. And I would argue the Steelers just don't have that when Pickens is not on the field. So that's what we're monitoring here, because if he's not out there, I do question the explosiveness, maybe even to the fact where you get off Russell Wilson in fantasy. Also, on the other side of the ball, TJ Watt's a DMP through his ankle injury he suffered this past week. And if the Steelers can't get pressure on Lamar Jackson, we've seen him lead the league with 9.9 yards per attempt from a clean pocket. That's going to be an issue if TJ Watt can't be out there playing across from Alex Highsmith. Derrick Henry this past week, or the last time they played the Steelers also, really struggled to get it going. 13 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown. Has now been under 90 rushing yards in 4 of his last 5 games. But what I think happens in this one, if we get Pickens, maybe there's a few more fantasy points and overall passing yards to go around. Otherwise, I think Mike Tomlin and Harbaugh just stare each other down again like the last time these two teams played and combining for less than 40 points and just say, like, we understand who we are and we're going to instead try to slog it out and instill our physicality on you and what could then be a lower scoring affair.
I'm surprised. I haven't looked at the line today, but on Tuesday's Even Money podcast, the Ravens were favored by 6, I think. I'm surprised by that. The margin of victory in this game has been between 1 to 3 points every game for the last 37 years before the Ravens even had a team. It has been, I'm joking, but it just seems like that's always what happens in this game.
I wonder if that's recency bias, since Lamar Jackson obviously got back into MVP conversation alongside Josh Allen with that 300-yard, 5-touchdown performance against the Giants.
A lot of holiday parties going on. Hopefully everywhere you go, or certainly if you're hosting the party, they have Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. Obviously, more opportunities this year to watch football and make delicious Smirnoff cocktails than ever before. We already had Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Now there's 2 games on Christmas. Then you got the Saturday games after that. This holiday season, when you're enjoying the game and your cocktails, please make sure to drink responsibly. Take a minute, make a plan, never drive impaired. Smirnoff, we do game days. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Let's get to, speaking of the Giants, how about the Giants and the Falcons, John?
The big news here, obviously, is Michael Penix getting the start over Kirk Cousins. Per ESPN's Bill Barnwell, the Falcons ran the ball on 23 of 24 first downs against the Raiders, which tells you they had been checked out of Kirk Cousins passing before that game even kicked off. And so this move was necessary, especially since Kirk Cousins struggled mightily against a Raiders defense without Max Crosby. I'll have more on that Raiders defense without Max Crosby when we get to that game later on. For me, this changes the offense because the Falcons have been unable to run play action at all, literally dead last in the league with Kirk Cousins under center. Now Michael Penix can do a little more. What happens with Penix under center, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know. Everyone is very excited about the change, and I get that because it does change the way the offense operates, but I'm just not sure what the trickle down is. Because previously, at least we could guarantee Drake London would get targets. Drake London had double-digit targets in 2 games out of the bye before Monday night. He still ultimately got there with 53 yards and a touchdown, but he's the one who Kirk Cousins has consistently fed. What happens if they get a quarterback who could open it up more? Does Drake London's target share? Does his ceiling come down? I don't know. I am a little more confident in Darnell Mooney, as we've even seen his time with Chicago. He's the guy who operates downfield. And in terms of Penix for this game against the Giants, Lamar Jackson just completed 4 of 5 passes for 116 yards and 3 touchdowns on throws 20 yards downfield. Remember, Penix on throws 20 yards downfield in his final year with the Huskies led the nation with 1,700 passing yards. That's where he feeds. That's where he wants to go. So at least in this short-term game against the Giants, I have all the confidence in the world in Penix being able to get the ball downfield cleanly. Also, all the confidence in the world, of course, for Bijan Robinson. Because now in 3 games out of Atlanta's bye, 32, 24, and 23 touches for Bijan, the Giants are allowing the second most yards per carry to opposing running backs with the most missed tackles in the league. So I think it's a game where the Falcons, at home, Penix's debut, really just put it on the Giants because New York really has no response except to continue feeding Malik Neighbors targets, which Tim Boyle did on 8 of his 22 pass attempts this past week off the bench.
It's funny, too, because the Giants are not good. And so Penix is going to come out and have a good game. and the takes are going to be flying
everyone.
about Penix and oh my gosh, Penix. All right, let's get to Arizona against Carolina. And one of my favorite times of the week, it's when you give us your value pick presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Trey Benson is battling an ankle injury, and Amari DiMercato, Arizona's third running back, is on injured reserve, which means the Cardinals are going to give the ball to James Conner and get the hell out of the way. Because the Panthers are allowing a league-high 4.9 yards per carry allowed to running backs, and they are the only defense allowing over 145 rushing yards per week. For reference, they're at 173 per week, well ahead of the race. And in their last 3 games, look at this. Rico Dowdle, 25 carries for 149 yards. Saquon Barkley, 20 carries for 124 yards. And then Bucky Irving exploded for 152 yards and a touchdown. This is James Conner's week, which is why he's my value pick at DraftKings.
Love it. What else you got on Arizona offensively? Trey McBride still doesn't have a touchdown. It's unbelievable.
116 targets without a receiving touchdown. Wrap your brain around that. It's almost as if there's a force field on the goal line. Does have a fumble recovery touchdown. Does have a rushing touchdown as they gave him a carry, an end around inside the 5-yard line at one point earlier this year, but no receiving scores. And I've watched several Cardinals games this year where Kyler Murray just misses him wide open too. It's as if it's illegal for McBride to score a touchdown. Having said that, his usage in terms of routes run, target share, continues to be top 2 among all tight ends, with George Kittle and Brock Bowers included. So Trey McBride, although you're not getting the touchdowns, I understand, he's still a tight end 1 for fantasy. No issues there. For the Panthers, a little more complicated because it was a letdown game for Chuba Hubbard. Maybe even fantasy managers who are listening to this just because they want the information are got out of their playoffs now because Chuba Hubbard had such a bad game, was an RB1 prior to that. But I will tell you, he still handled 14 of 16 running back touches without Jonathan Brooks available. And the Cardinals, the last couple of weeks, Zach Charbonnet rushed for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the Patriots running backs combined for 20 touches and 102 yards from scrimmage. So I do think it's another game where we can go back to Chuba Hubbard and we cross our fingers that the Panthers offense can stick around rather than James Conner just running all over them and building a big lead. Adam Thielen also, I know he falls behind Jalen Coker in terms of receiving yards, but 75% of Jalen Coker's 110 receiving yards, a season-high mark on the year, did come on that one busted coverage play where he ran for an 83-yard touchdown. Thielen still led the team with 7 targets. So Thielen's the one option among the Panthers receivers that I still have all the faith in the world in here.
Love it. Almost as much as I love Labatt Blue Light, which is so delicious. And I'll be drinking that. Hopefully they have it in Indianapolis Friday night. I'll be watching Notre Dame and Indiana in Indianapolis. That city will be buzzing, even though the game's up at South Bend. Drink some Labatt Blue Lights while you're watching football this weekend with friends and family. Live life to the power of we. It's the holiday season. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. All right, John, Lions, Bears. Montgomery is out. Can't even imagine what we're going to see from Jahmyr Gibbs.
It's going to be a nuclear game, I would expect from Gibbs. So David Montgomery has left 3 times this year with an injury. And in those 3 games, Jahmyr Gibbs came off the bench and totaled 160 yards for 2 touchdowns, 99 yards for 2 touchdowns, and 114 yards for 2 touchdowns. Also, in their last couple of games without Matt Eberflus coaching them, the Bears have allowed 157 yards and 3 touchdowns to the 49ers backfield. And then on Monday night, the Vikings, Cam Akers and Aaron Jones combined for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. All of that tells you Gibbs is about to have an incredible game. Would have been my DraftKings pick of the week. I just thought it was too obvious. And what's interesting about Gibbs being in there is that I wonder how it changes the overall construction of the Detroit's offense. Because previously, this is why him and David Montgomery, who's now out for the year, were called Sonic and Knuckles. But now the Lions don't have Knuckles. So how do they instill their physicality in the trenches and show teams, at least especially in early games, on early downs as well, like we are here to also pound the rock? Because Gibbs brings a different archetype in being still a great running back who deserves 20-plus touches per week, but explosive. Doesn't really take you head on. and let you know they've arrived like David Montgomery does in terms of football terminology. So I do wonder if the offense could open up for Ben Johnson and Jared Goff. I wonder if it's a lot more passing to Sam Laporta, Amon St. Brown, Tim Patrick even, who's had 7 and 8 targets the last couple of weeks without Khalif Raymond. I wonder if they just become a different unit altogether and say, we now understand we have to outscore you as opposed to trying to impose our will on you, which makes it a really interesting matchup because it's not just that the Bears defense has fallen apart, as I mentioned with Gibbs, it's also that the Lions defense, the injuries just continue to mount in the secondary and the trenches. We're talking about 3rd to 5th stringers out there right now who are doing their best, but they're just not ready for this moment to play every single snap. And so I do think this is going to be a very high-scoring game. Since we have seen Caleb Williams, I know he turns the ball over this past week, but typically he's been very good at protecting the ball. And the Lions also, without Aiden Hutchinson, can't rush the passer. So I think he's going to have opportunities, Caleb Williams, to deliver it upfield against this injury-riddled Lions secondary. And if that's the case, DJ Moore still offers a high floor, but Keenan Allen is my favorite. The Lions allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing slot receivers. We saw Keenan Allen pop up this past week with a big game and a touchdown as well.
Next up, my game. I already have like 5 notes I've taken already, but I'm definitely going to take even more for my next game. Titans, Colts.
Mason Rudolph under center for Will Levis. And it was about that time after Levis threw his league-high 4th pick 6 this past week. Rudolph came off the bench, also threw an interception, but in 3 starts this year, he's finished as the QB 13, QB 15, and QB 14 for fantasy. A sturdy superflex option with a rushing floor. More importantly, everyone's wondering, can we have faith in Calvin Ridley for Mason Rudolph? And I would argue can, because with Ridley and without DeAndre Hopkins this year, with Mason Rudolph on the field, Ridley has a 30% target share. That's where he loves to go. So I do have faith in Calvin Ridley in this spot. More importantly, we are waiting out word on Tony Pollard because he re-aggravated his ankle injury he's been battling the last month. And we saw that not only Tajay Spears come off the bench for every single running back touch behind him this past game against the Bengals, but the Colts are also one of only 3 defenses allowing over 1,000 yards after contact on rushing plays. They can't tackle anyone. And if that's the case, we know Tajay Spears at a Tulane was a big yak machine. That's what he does. All he does is slide past tackles and make yards after the contact happens. So I love Tajay Spears as a RB2, maybe even RB1, if he gets the start in place of Tony Pollard. On the other side of the ball, it's a little bit tougher for Anthony Richardson. Not the greatest layout, admittedly, because the Titans, even in battling injuries in their trenches, Tavondre Sweat, and their secondary over the past month, they've created 7 interceptions in that time and limited every quarterback to less than 20 passing points through the air. And it wasn't a bunch of slouches they faced. CJ Stroud, Jane Daniels, Joe Burrow in that span. They've taken good quarterbacks. Even Burrow this past week held them under 275 yards, got a couple picks on them, put them under pressure. And so the Titans are still very good at creating chaos within their pass rush and then creating turnovers in their secondary. And that's not good news for Anthony Richardson. Yes, he can still get there with a rushing score, as he showed us this past week. Otherwise, though, I'm skeptical about Richardson this game. I'm more looking to pick him up for fantasy and start him next week against the Giants in the fantasy championship.
Love it. John, we got about 2 minutes here for the last game. Rams and Jets.
And I know everyone will be shocked to hear what I think is going to be a high-scoring affair, a good contest after that Rams-49ers complete dud on Thursday night that bored everyone out of the bars in their homes. But the Rams are getting extended rest now, 10 days rest, and the Jets have allowed at least 18 fantasy points to 4 of the last 5 quarterbacks they've faced, as their defense has completely crumbled under interim head coach Jeff Ulbrich. The last 2 weeks alone, Tua Tagovailoa and Mac Jones, not exactly a murderer's row of opponents, but those 2 quarterbacks combined for over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, although we got the dud from Cooper Kupp, it's a game I expect him to bounce back mightily with Puka Nacua. And I expect that because on the other side of the ball, Aaron Rodgers and the Jets have been pushing it successfully downfield. Back-to-back top 12 performances for Aaron Rodgers as the Jets are officially eliminated from the playoffs. And in that time, and they're 3 games out of the bye, we've seen he's been successful because all he does is feed the right 2 guys. Devontae Adams, 35 targets. Garrett Wilson, 26. No one else involved. So in a condensed target share with these all-pro wide receivers who are hitting their stride, Davante Adams especially over the last month around the team's bye, I do think this is going to be a game that goes over its total.
Love it. I am expecting that as well. I give a lot of credit, actually, to Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams with how they're playing, even though they're obviously out of it. Like, they looked excited. They were playing their butts off in the second half against the Jaguars, two terrible teams. Well done, John. We still have 8 more games to get to in episode 2 of the show. That's so nice. We do it twice. Love those of you that rate and review the show on social media, or actually that's on Apple Podcasts, or spread the word on social media. It means a great deal. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. He's at Not J Daigle. Dessert is still to come.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.